Dr. Dana Palalunas. Dr. Palalunas is doing some amazing work right here in our own backyard. She's an assistant professor in the psychology department at Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri. Dr. Palalunas has published articles in several highly regarded journals like the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, the Journal of Behavioral Education, Behavior Analysis and Practice, and the Analysis of Verbal Behavior. Dr. Palalunas is also the co-author of the Accept, Identify, Move curriculum, or otherwise known as AIM. AIM is a social emotional curriculum, and it's a synthesis of mindfulness, acceptance and commitment therapy, and applied behavior analysis packaged together to promote positive behavior change. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this curriculum because Dr. Palalunas has a wonderful presentation in store for us today, and I don't want to spoil things. However, the work she is doing is really groundbreaking, and we are so excited that she is here to talk to us today more about her work. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Dana Palalunas.
Thank you so much. That was the nicest introduction. I'm so happy to be here today. Hello, everybody out there. I'll second that if you want to turn on video, that would be cool because I can see you then and feel like I'm talking to people rather than my office, which is how I normally feel these days. Thank you for those of you who just turned on videos. I'm also going to ask for some input from you guys a couple times throughout the presentation. So if you can have your chat function ready, and when we're chatting, I'd love for everyone to send messages to everyone rather than just me or anything like that until maybe questions that we can save for the end. I think those are the housekeeping things I had. I'll add just a little bit more background about myself. I am Dana Palalunas. I am in Springfield, Missouri. I'm very excited to be meeting and talking with some of you who are, well, all of you, I believe, who are in Missouri too. I've been in Missouri for about 3 years now, so I'm just starting to feel like I'm a resident here, like this is my community now. So I'm very excited to meet all of you and get to talk a little bit about AIM. So just a little bit more background about me. I do teach in our psychology department here at Missouri State University. I have my specialty in behavior analysis and therapy. Going farther back, this is kind of, I don't know, I think of what I'm doing now as kind of my second or third career. I started as a special education teacher in the Chicagoland area. And truthfully, AIM is kind of the reason why I've changed my career a few times in a broad sense. I started my career as a teacher, and I felt so prepared to teach my students to meet their academic needs. I really felt like I kind of had that under my belt as a young, fresh teacher. But then after I taught for a little while, I realized that in terms of supporting my students with their behavioral needs, that I didn't feel that I had all the skills that I needed to do that. So I returned to school to get my master's in behavior analysis and become a behavior analyst. While I was doing that, I kind of realized that now, okay, I'm able to meet my students' behavioral needs. However, the students that I work with don't seem to be feeling better. They might be behaving better, but I don't necessarily feel like their quality of life is improving in the way that I'd like it to improve, or that I'm supporting their social, emotional, their psychological, their emotional needs the best way that I can. And that's really what prompted me to go back to study more in depth psychological well-being, psychological flexibility, and think about how we could support individuals better to get all of their needs met. So that's some background about me. The most important thing about this slide are my two dogs. That's Watson and Dewey. They are just the cutest things in the world, I think, and I find a reason to put them in every presentation that I give. I just am noticing I have 3 screens set up here in my office that I'm using in order to accomplish this presentation. And I will try to look at the camera, but if you see me looking over here, that's when I'm looking at you all. So right now I see all of you. I'm not looking away, I'm looking at you. So just so you know, if I'm looking around, like looking a little bit lost, that's why. All right, so let's carry on. My plan for today, it's a lofty plan because we don't have that much time together, but we're going to move like the wind to try to cover a lot of ground. First, I just want to get to know you guys a little bit better, then talk a bit about psychological flexibility and APT, give kind of a brief overview of the AIM curriculum, and then I really want to use the question and answer time we have at the end to maybe open up some discussion, do a little Q&A about individualization. So really, your questions about how this relates to what you're doing, the population you work with, your role, and whatnot. So when you're thinking of questions to ask for the end, keep that in mind. We're going to be wanting to talk about individualizing this, using this in your real life. So if we could in the chat, just share a couple of pieces of information with me so I can get a sense of who all is here today. Just answering the question, kind of what's your role? And just in a few words or less, why supporting client well-being matters to you. You can just do one message, send them multiple messages, throw it out there. We have administrators, we have behavior analysts. You want to improve quality of life. Everyone deserves to have a big life. Oh, I like that. We have some specialists, someone in HR. Taking care of health of a population. Yeah, at the end of the day, it all comes back to health and well-being. Well-being directly impacts quality of life. We want to support clients across all parts of their lives, have a meaningful life, having the best life possible. Prevent risk, teach skills, improve quality of life, people opportunity for their best life. All right. I love asking this question because I always get similar responses, right? This is about the well-being of a person as a whole and supporting them in having that meaningful life that looks the way they want it to look and feels the way they want it to feel, and is always looking to improve that quality of life. And the questions are very rarely, it matters to me because I want to reduce problem behavior. Like, I never really get that answer, right? It's really, why do we reduce problem behavior? So this person can have that life they want to have that meaningful experience, feel productive and happy and engaged in their world. And that's why all this stuff that we're going to be talking about today really matters. So thank you all for sharing. So first code word, sudden. I'll give you a second to write that down. Don't forget to take note of these. Oh, I just saw someone in the chat say positivity is contagious. Yeah, for sure. Someone else said that they're an advocate. And I think we're all here advocates for our clients. All right, code word one, sudden. Make sure you got that down. So I'm going to start out kind of at the end. And I know I haven't told you much about what AIM is yet, but you know enough to know that it's a social emotional curriculum using behavior analytic approaches to support psychological flexibility and well-being among clients. So why would we want to do this? Is everyone here familiar with what's called the three-term contingency, or maybe the ABCs of behavior? Getting some head nods. I think most are giving me support or yeses. So the three-term contingency feels like it can fall short when someone we're working with has more complex language skills. Does anyone here have this experience where you design the world's most beautiful behavior plan, you have all the right supports in place, you've done beautiful assessment, you've done all the right things, and somehow your plan falls short of what you want it to do? Give me like a something. Oh, we got a thumbs up. That's a good option. But yes, every presentation I ever give, we've all experienced this sort of thing. I remember when I was in school, I find myself, and I consider myself a very, committed behavior analyst. I'd be saying very non-behavior analytic things like, oh, well, reinforcement just doesn't work with this kid. or the problem isn't here, it's at home, or the behavior just comes out of nowhere, right? These things are not true, right? If we have a behavioral viewpoint at all, of course reinforcement works. If it's not working, it means you're not doing it, right? Or the problem is obviously here because it's happening here in this present environment. Nothing comes out of nowhere. We know everything has a cause, right? So although I found myself, and I think a lot of us have these sorts of thoughts, even when we have that behavioral viewpoint, there's a reason for that. And that is because the three-term contingency alone and the way that we often approach it is not quite enough. And what we want is to create a system where we could address challenging behaviors and those other pieces of the puzzle that lead us to think, oh, this isn't working. Problem's not here, comes out of nowhere. We need to support those emotional, psychological needs using a therapeutic, skill-focused approach so that we can take challenges where we feel the sorts of things that I'm describing here, but we're able to address them in a systematic way. Because sometimes the behavior for what we have to see in front of us is coming out of the blue, right? It's just popping up out of nowhere. And that's not because it's actually coming from nowhere. It's because we don't have enough information to know what's causing it. And so how do we, when there are things we cannot see and things we cannot control, going to have an impact? And developing psychological flexibility is one way we can do that. So within this context of the three-term contingency, I'm going to nerd out a little bit on ABA stuff here for a second. So if you're not a big ABA person, just hang tight for a moment. So we have this three-term contingency, right? We have antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. We also have the individual themselves who is present in that situation, right? So this is complicated enough, to be honest. Okay? Those of us who do assessment, who work in behavior intervention know identifying antecedents, behaviors, and consequences is a challenging enough endeavor to begin with. But then it's already complicated because we know that person brings to them an entire history that affects how they behave in that moment, right? They might have certain initial advantages or disadvantages. They might have sensory differences. They might be diagnosed with a disorder of some kind. They're bringing something to that table that affects how they behave in a situation. When we think about an antecedent event, there's very rarely just one singular stimulus in the environment that's affecting us at a time, right? We know that motivating operations, setting events, having multiple stimuli around, all of these things complicate the antecedent event. Very rarely is it just one tiny thing in the environment that we can pull out and completely cover it. We often think about behavior in terms of like two behaviors, right? There's like the adaptive behavior and there's the maladaptive behavior. But the reality of the situation is at any given moment, there are infinite behaviors we could engage in, right? We could do anything at any given moment. I could get up right now and start doing jumping jacks for you on camera, right? I could do that. If you ask what's Dana going to do in her presentation today, that's probably not one of the things that you would have thought of, but there's no reason I couldn't, right? When we think about consequences, these are maybe the most complicated. How probable are they? Consequences are really about percentages and probabilities. How delayed are those consequences? In this context, how often does reinforcement or punishment tend to be available? We have to think about setting events and motivating operations again. So this, again, complex enough to begin with. But our traditional behavior intervention plans tend to be pretty good at accounting for a lot of these variables. The thing that we maybe don't often attend to is the language that we engage in around all of this. There's not only antecedents and consequences, there are the thoughts and feelings that that person has about those antecedents and consequences. The way they talk about it, the way other people talk to them about it. In terms of people's behavior, it's not just the overt behavior we can see, but also the private behavior or the covert behavior that we can't see, the things they feel inside, the thoughts that they have that they don't share publicly, right? that takes this already very complex thing and like to some crazy exponent makes it more complicated, right? Because not only is verbal behavior not something that we can really touch, it's also something that can be symbolic. It can be in any way, shape, or form. Things don't have to make sense when it comes to verbal behavior. So it makes it hard to capture all of that. So when we're intervening, we want to have our environmental interventions to address all of this stuff at the bottom half of my three-term contingency here, right? We need to make changes to the environment, have antecedent procedures, to have reinforcement plans in place, to teach certain skills and behavior. But the missing piece, I think, a lot of the time is to have some sort of verbal intervention for individuals who engage in verbal behavior or have language skills that addresses all that language stuff that's going on. The way that they interact, nobody get mad at me here, but the way they interact in their mind with these things, right? We need to account for that and teach skills and prepare people to navigate those things as well. So really what this all comes down to is that a person's social, emotional, or their psychological needs are not separate from their behavior, right? Too often, I think we see plans to address someone's behavior and then plans to address their mental health or well-being, right? I think that's not the best way we could do things, right? Our well-being, our social emotional needs, our psychological needs are behavior, right? The things I think and feel are me engaging in behavior, all right? So the way we interact verbally through those thoughts and feelings and emotions affects how we behave in that world, right? I always think of a silly example of if someone told me people wearing pink shirts today are attacking people on elevators. If I was getting on an elevator and I saw someone in a pink shirt, I'd probably behave in a certain way and get out of there. But if someone told me, oh, no, that was incorrect. People wearing pink shirts today are giving money away for free to people who get on elevators with them, I'd be like, hustling to the elevator, right? Those language things, those words, have a major impact on how I interact with the world around me. So we need to account for both. So if we only intervene on one of those things, we're missing the big picture. We only address the language stuff using, an approach like ACT or CBT or something like that. We're not going to be able to affect that overt behavior. If we only address that overt behavior, we're going to miss addressing those language needs. Okay, and the positive thing here, the encouraging thing here, adaptive behavior can be learned, whether that is overt behavior, right, engaging in appropriate behavior in a certain context, or if that's verbal or private behavior, right, learning to interact with your thoughts and feelings in a more adaptive way is really what AIM is all about. So I feel like we got to start at, 20 minutes in here, at where do our clients, or how do our clients suffer emotionally, right? That's not something that we often have conversations about, at least in the fields that I've worked with. So kind of the traditional view of human suffering is that in the right circumstances, we'd all be great, right? If we got to live in our happy place, we'd be frolicking and smiling and happy, and we'd feel good all the time, right? And so if you are experiencing some sort of psychological pain or suffering or distress, that means something's wrong with you and we need to fix that, right? So if we're suffering as a result of difficult thoughts, feelings, or emotions, then we should and can avoid those things, reduce them, change them in some way, shape, or form. So it's kind of the traditional way of thinking about it, right? If someone says, oh, I feel like such a loser, someone says, that's not right. You shouldn't think that. Instead, think, I'm super duper, right? As a kind of way to minimize there, but highlight kind of that approach. So this is the standard kind of view that I think in our society we have towards suffering. An alternative way to think about that is using an acceptance-based approach. And this approach says that are normal psychological processes, okay, are private events, thoughts, feelings, memories, things that go on that other people are not privy to, are often destructive and will create suffering for all of us at some point. So if you are suffering psychologically in some way, shape, or form, that is a normal thing and it's to be expected. And there is nothing wrong that needs to be fixed. That is just something that you need to learn how to navigate. Okay, it seems like a subtle difference, because it is, but it's kind of, when we think of the implications, a massive impact on how we treat these sort of challenges. Using that traditional approach, we might think of bad thoughts and feelings as something to be suppressed, right? We might think of changing the content of our thoughts and feelings, right? Changing what you say to yourself. And then we might also work really hard to find ways to avoid the things that cause the distress, right? If you're having challenges with friends in school, find new friends. If you're getting bullied on the way to school, find a new way to walk to school. If a kid is disruptive in a classroom, find a seat in the classroom where they won't be disruptive, right? These are the kind of approaches that are predominant using that approach. This acceptance-based approach will say bad thoughts and events are not things we can control, so instead we will accept them. Okay, note that I'm not saying give in to them, just accept that they are occurring, and then leave all that stuff in your head. We don't need to try to change the thoughts you're having. We don't need to try to replace your thoughts or teach you new ways of thinking. We just want to teach people to interact with it in a different way. When you have a thought that might historically produce some panic, we might want you to learn how to not respond with a panicked response to that thought. And then third, to find what are the things that you value. What are the big reinforcers for you that you really want to work for in your life, and not let all that stuff in your head, the thoughts and feelings that you have, get in the way of behaving in a way that produces those values. So how does this shift the way we interact with clients? Well, how we respond to them might change, right? Even just something as simple as when they say, I'm so stupid, it might just change the way we respond to that statement. How we model behavior. We want to learn to model being accepting, right, and taking this approach. How we redirect clients might change. The way that we provide reinforcement, what we provide reinforcement for might change. How we relate to our clients in an interpersonal way could change. And you could think of probably a lot of other ways that your interactions with clients might change. Really, the big shift here is that rather than teaching people how to win this fight against their painful thoughts and feelings, right, to overcome all of those feelings of fear, self-doubt, anxiety, sadness, unworthiness, whatever it might be, rather than trying to teach them how to win that fight, we want to try to teach them how to drop the rope here and the tug of war with those thoughts and feelings, right? Rather than struggling against them, to just not argue, not fight it, right? And make room to do something different. Okay, think about how you see this struggle, this fight against these sorts of thoughts and feelings show up for your own clients. Right? What does it look like for them when they're struggling in this way? So, anyone here a Star Wars nerd like me? Anyway, oh, okay, great. So glad to see some like-minded people. So we need to really think about what suffering and unhappiness are from the ACT perspective, the acceptance and commitment therapy perspective. We need to talk about what psychological inflexibility is. And this is when our verbal behavior, the thoughts and feelings that we have, get in the way of our ability to persist or make changes to our behavior in the service of something that we value. So for you Star Wars fans, and hopefully everyone's at least familiar enough with Star Wars to get this reference. If you're not, I apologize. I like to think of inflexibility through Anakin Skywalker, or Darth Vader, on his journey to the dark side. Okay? We see how he responds verbally to his challenging life experiences. He experiences tragedy. He begins thinking of things in absolutes. He starts blaming others for his problems. He blames himself for his problems. He starts thinking and speaking in a very rigid way. He gets caught up in the content of his thoughts and his emotions. He suffers in a real way. And this leads him to the dark side, to the inflexibility. The inverse of that is what we want to facilitate using this approach. Psychological flexibility emphasizes the relationship between our language and our suffering, seeking to increase something we call psychological flexibility, emphasizing that relationship between our thoughts and feelings and our suffering. Right? And having a clear definition of this is kind of important to think about effective intervention. Although none of the words that I will say here will represent what psychological flexibility is better than this image, right? Moving from feeling weighted down by our thoughts and emotions to be able to interact with them lightly, right? Not change them, just change the way you're interacting with them. So in the big picture, this is a definition of psychological flexibility that really jives with me. Okay, there's a few different ones out there. This is the one I like. Persistence with or changing of behavior in accordance with values-based contingencies while contacting all stimuli, both public and private, in the present environment. Okay. Cashdan, I highly recommend this article if you're interested in this topic, but discussed psychological flexibility as a key component of health in general, not just behavior, but just health, providing his own definition that includes 4 kind of primary sets of responding: adapting to fluctuating situational demands, reconfiguring your mental resources, shifting perspective, balancing competing domains of your life simultaneously. Okay. What I really like about this is the idea that psychological flexibility has to be incorporated into repeated interactions between people and their environment. When we talk about what psychological flexibility, it's not just one behavior that someone engages in, right? I'm not like, oh, look, you did psychological flexibility. Good job, right? This is kind of a way of interacting with your environment, more like a pattern of behavior. So again, I keep talking about this relationship between our language and our behavior. Okay, our language, those things that can maybe make us suffer, feel distressed or distraught, is something that we can learn to carry with us as we move toward the direction of our values. As we respond to contingencies of reinforcement in our environment that get us the stuff that's important to us, right? Basically, with a lot of our clients or students that we work with, we see this beautifully arranged behavior intervention plan. We see an environment that is very supportive of adapted behavior, but the way they are interacting with that environment is not allowing them to respond to those contingencies in the way that we would predict. Right? Those thoughts and feelings are impeding their ability to respond to those contingencies or making them insensitive to those contingencies. So by teaching them how to interact with those thoughts and feelings in a different way, we can allow them to contact those contingencies of reinforcement in their environment that produce those reinforcers that are meaningful to them. So what does it look like being flexible? It looks like being able to choose from a wide range of possible responses. Maybe persisting with one behavior, even if it's hard to, or being willing to change your behavior if what you're doing isn't working, depending on the context that you're in and what it is important to you in that moment or that situation. It sounds like a thing that we would all like to be able to do, right? It's not too radical here. It just seems like a good idea to learn. So when we think about our target behavior change outcomes, with our approach and aim using this ACT approach is not to change what our target behaviors are, right? We don't want to keep those the same. We need those over indicators of behavior change to know if we're having an effect for our clients, right? So our target behavior change, or target behavior for change is going to be pretty much the same. We want to make sure we have those direct environmental manipulations in place to support those behaviors. We also want to make sure we're providing that verbal intervention support that's needed so the individual can interact in that adaptive way with their thoughts and feelings. That's what we're about here. Okay? I don't know if we have any skeptics of this approach in the room. I normally do. Cool if you are. I used to be one of them. We're not here trying to change behavior intervention into psychotherapy. We're not trying to do that. Okay? For those of us who work in behavior intervention, that's just not our role. What we're looking here is how do we teach adaptive, flexible responding by supporting psychological flexibility. So, acceptance and commitment therapy, you'll often also see the term acceptance and commitment training being used. This targets psychological flexibility as kind of the primary goal of the intervention approach. Okay? ACT is a model and a way to approach intervention. It's not a particular set of technologies or anything like that. It's really a way to approach managing those private events. The ACT approach has an emphasis on experiential techniques. ACT uses a lot of metaphor and therapeutic exercises. It emphasizes skill acquisition, and it also emphasizes the use of reinforcement-based procedures. Okay, I just want to reiterate, ACT is not a specific technology that magically fixes everyone's problem, although genuinely it feels that way a lot of the time. This is something that can be embedded into what we're already doing to more kind of holistically support the individuals that we're working with. So the Hexaplex, I am, for the sake of time, not going to go terribly in depth on each of these 6 core processes of the ACT model, because we don't have, I could just talk for 2 hours just on them. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction of them here. So in order to build, facilitate, teach psychological flexibility, okay, we, in our approach, use 6 what we call core processes, or kind of 6 skill sets that we want to develop that collectively support someone in engaging in those flexible behaviors. Okay, so first is present moment awareness, okay, or being here now, maintaining contact with the present moment, responding to current stimuli in the environment around you, as well as the current stimuli that you're experiencing privately. Not things overwhelmingly from the past, not things overwhelmingly from the future. Next is acceptance. This is learning to tolerate, be willing to experience, open to all of your thoughts, feelings, memories, experiences. Okay, so this is learning not to avoid feeling bad, or situations that you think you might feel bad in, or things that might feel stressful. Right? This is learning to be open to those feelings so that we can choose what we do rather than being forced to avoid things. Diffusion is learning to get some space from the thoughts and feelings that you have. Rather than responding to every thought or emotion that you have as something that's true or literal or definite, we learn to see the process of thinking as something that we do, and to notice our thoughts and to be able to identify them and learn to get a little space from them so that we can see when they're helpful and when they're not so helpful, and how we're going to respond to those thoughts and feelings. Selfish context is definitely the most kind of abstract, difficult core process to wrap your head around, but it's really about, in a colloquial way, developing awareness. But I think about it in terms of being able to take perspective, right? To be able to change your perspective taking in different moments, and to maintain the perspective yourself as an observer, to be able to be aware of noticing your own behavior as it's happening, your overt behavior as well as your covert behavior, and not then defining yourself by those behaviors, but realizing you're the one there experiencing all of it. Next, we have development of clear values learning to identify what really matters to you, what's the kind of the core of what's important to you in your life. This values approach to me really means helping someone find what those kind of wells of reinforcement are in their life. What are those categories of things that produce a lot of reinforcement for them? For some people, it is engaging in health-related behaviors. For some people, it's being a good parent, a good partner. For clients, it could be something more finite, like earning a certain privilege or source of independence that they've been working toward, or something like that. What's really important to that person. And then committed action. What behaviors need to occur in order to experience those values, access those reinforcers? This is what you literally do out in your life that produces those values. The way I kind of think about it is, can you see my mouse moving here? Okay. These four on this side, be here now, acceptance, diffusion, self context, are really addressing all that language stuff, right? Learning how to manage those thoughts and feelings that show up. This is kind of the mindfulness stuff. This other side here, values and committed action, well, so with some support of these other ones in the middle, this is really about behavior change. What are you going to do? And how are you going to do it? Okay. Give me a second here. I need to switch my view. Do we have the freedom to run maybe 10 minutes over? Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Great. So ACT comes from the behavioral tradition, okay? To release any worries about us behavior analysts in the room, behavior analysts developed ACT, okay? It's not always applied behavior analytically. It can be done in psychotherapy, but the core of ACT is behavior analytic, and we can do it as behavior analysts, okay? However, you might want to read more in depth into these questions and topics, so I put a couple of really great articles about the relationship of ACT and ABA on this slide. If you haven't read them already, I'd snap a pic or something and maybe go back and read these. They're great articles. And just to show kind of the growth of ACT within the behavior intervention world, there are lots of articles starting to come out using an ACT approach by behavior analysts or integrating an ACT approach with other behavioral techniques and strategies. The kind of big areas where I personally see this research showing up is an intervention with individuals with developmental disorders, with parent training interventions, for interventions for substance abuse or behavioral addiction, in the workplace or OBM situations, and then for also with neurotypical populations. So we see kind of a proliferation right now of ACT being used in a lot of different settings within behavior analysis. So I want to pause for a second to think about how this ACT stuff relates back to kids. And I'll even extend that to say people whose language skills are less advanced. Okay, so what I'm saying about children would apply to anyone who has more limited language repertoire. Okay, so far the evidence suggests that ACT processes can be adapted to work with children, but the research in this area is just less advanced than it is with adults at this point in time. Okay, basically intervention still focuses on that inflexibility that results from all that language stuff and how that restricts access to reinforcement. What's different when using ACT approaches with kids is their developmental level, right? Kind of no duh. What makes kids different from adults? Their development, right? This makes flexibility or inflexibility look different for kids. Behavior may appear as non-compliance, aggression, withdrawal, right? Those are kind of signs of inflexible behavior. The language that they use is going to be less sophisticated. They're going to make fewer abstractions, right? They might speak more literally. However, they're still interacting with their world through their thoughts and feelings. And then when we think about their values, those reinforcers might be more tangible, more immediate, right? When I say the word values, we usually think of big picture things, right? Health, wellness, family, community. For younger individuals or individuals with less advanced language skills, this might look more like what they are literally working for in their environment, things that they are working toward, goals that they've set for themselves. So when we're intervening using ACT for children, our changes are going to be regarding all those metaphors within the ACT approach. Okay, we're going to make things as concrete as possible. We're going to try to make things as literal as we can. We're going to use more physical activities than we would with adults. We're going to use more experiential activities than we would with adults. And something to keep in mind when working with individuals with fewer language skills is that on that slide where I showed you that kind of hexagon with all of the ACT core processes, that's a lot of terminology, right? And a lot of the time when people are working with kids, they're like, how am I going to teach kids to say all of these different words and use all these concepts? And my first response is, you can. It takes a lot of time and patience and willingness and practice, but you can. But two, the point is the experience, not the terminology. So if we can engage them in practicing psychological flexibility, it's less important if they can label what they're doing, right? If we can have them practice getting a little space from their thoughts, they don't have to be able to tell me, I'm diffusing from my thoughts, right? So we want to emphasize that experience. Although you guys, if you're anything like me, will be shocked at how much this language becomes a part of your interaction with individuals. So from this AIM approach, there's a few other important concepts that I want to quickly touch upon. One, mindfulness. We kind of talk about mindfulness as separate from the ACT approach because you really need to practice mindfulness as its own thing. So mindfulness from our approach is the intentional, accepting, and non-judgmental focus of your attention on the emotions, thoughts, and sensations occurring in the present moment. So it's just being aware of how you feel physically, psychologically, in this moment right here, right now, to be aware of that. Other important concept, behavior management. We've already talked about the ABCs. The whole point of identifying those antecedents and consequences of behavior is so that we can determine what the function of that behavior is. Why is that person engaging in this behavior? Commonly, we talk about that in terms of attention, escape, access to tangible items, or some sensory stimulation, right? It's for another day, but we could talk about how broad the concept of function really is and how we maybe could change the way we think about it. But we do want to get at the why of why someone's engaging in a behavior. And then the last big concept flows from that, right? How do we effectively manage contingencies in the environment, okay? Using the AIM approach, we emphasize on a token economy in order to do so. How do we incorporate function and reinforcement into a system by identifying that person's real reinforcers, using that values-based approach, creating an economy where they can earn access to those function-based reinforcers and then monitor that behavior in an ongoing way. So then AIM, what the heck is that? It is a framework for managing behavior while teaching social emotional skills. Okay? This is designed to teach students, clients, whoever you're working with, to manage their behaviors and the daily struggles that they need to navigate. Okay? How it does this is synthesizing a few behavior analytic techniques into an instructional curriculum, okay, a set of lessons that you will use to teach psychological flexibility, a framework for a behavior management system using that token economy and reinforcement-based approach, and a data management system framework that will help you determine what data to collect for that individual. Okay, so kind of three components here. I'm really going to give a little more attention right now to the instructional curriculum because it tends to be the most novel to people. So I'm going to focus on that. So AIM, accept, identify, move. This is the ACT model in a nutshell, right? How do we learn to accept the things we're struggling with? How to accept the world as it is? Identify what's important to us in that moment, in that world, in this moment, and how do we move toward the thing that matters? Once we know what reinforcers we're seeking, what behaviors do we engage in to get them? That's really kind of AIM in a nutshell. So how do we do this? 3 kind of core pieces. 1, regular mindful practice. 2, we called our ACT lesson kind of therapeutic reconditioning, changing the way you're interacting with those thoughts and feelings. And then 3, functional behavior management. Make sure that your clients are contacting reinforcement for behaving in a psychologically flexible way. So what does this look like in the big picture? 1, we need to change the context in which people behave, right? This is what we're generally pretty good at doing, developing those robust environmental behavior plans, right? We need to set up the environment to support the kind of behavior we want to see. Then we need to alter the way that that person interacts with their verbal behavior about things, right? This is where the ACT stuff comes into play. Change the environment, change the way we interact with the environment, and then make sure we reinforce that flexible, adaptive behavior that leads to those preferred outcomes. Change the environment, change the way we interact with it, make sure we reinforce that flexible behavior. Not just appropriate behavior, but flexible behavior. So the big picture goal is to increase the likelihood of that person responding to those contingencies that we've arranged or those that are natural in the environment that reinforce those appropriate adaptive flexible behaviors. So how is this done literally through the AIM curriculum? 1, regular mindful practice. 2, regular experiential AIM or ACT lessons. 3, a point system that's individualized to each person participating in the curriculum. Ongoing progress monitoring and that functional reinforcement, okay? That point system, progress monitoring, and functional reinforcement thing, I'm not going to talk too much about because I think I'm getting the sense that that's the stuff that you guys already do really well. How do we then embed the mindfulness and the ACT stuff to make what you're already doing more effective? So just for the sake of time, we've kind of already talked about mindfulness. So I'm just going to quickly say that mindfulness, from our approach and our perspective, is something that's available to you all the time, right? We often think about mindfulness as like a formal meditation of some kind. That's one way to practice mindfulness, and we certainly do want to teach children to maybe engage in formal things like a meditation or a body scan or a relaxation technique. But mindfulness is also something you just do throughout the course of your day, right? To just be present and aware of what's happening here and now, right? Just to be really doing what you're doing. My favorite quote that I ever saw about mindfulness was that being mindful does not mean thinking about the universe while you're peeling the potatoes. It's just peeling the potatoes, right? So that's really what we want to develop with mindfulness. So in the AIM curriculum, we have a set of brief mindful moment activities that you can engage in with your clients. Okay, these are meant to be like 1 to 5 minute exercises that you could do on some regular basis, daily, hourly, weekly, however you can do it, but to have regular mindful practice within your client's day. The kind of core of AIM are the ACT-based lessons. These have 3 tiers embedded in them. 1, a brief discussion or a moment of reflection related to the topic of the day or the lesson. The second tier is all about practicing those core processes, practicing being accepting, practicing diffusing from thought, practicing committed action, that sort of thing. Okay, so there are some prompts for discussion and then an experiential activity. And then tier 3 is really about how do we apply those core processes in our everyday life. So we have some discussion regarding that and then an activity to practice that. These build upon one another. Some people do all 3 tiers with an individual. Sometimes people do just 2 tiers. This is really where that individualization component comes into play. I hope already today that you've noticed that I'm talking a lot about talking, right? This requires a lot of language skills, right? You're going to use an ACT approach with someone who you can interact with in a verbal way, right? Not necessarily a vocal way, but in a verbal way. So if you have clients who are pre-verbal or are not able to do things like derive relations, engage in stimulus equivalence, that sort of thing, this might not be the approach that you're going to use with them. But for your clients who do have some language skills, even if they are rudimentary, this approach might be useful. So this is what a lesson looks like. Okay, so we've got that first tier, which is just kind of some prompts for reflection or some small discussion. We have that tier 2, which in this case is about practicing present moment awareness. First, we have some prompts for some discussion and a description of a brief activity to complete. Okay, here, they had kind of 3 minutes of just trying to pay attention to what they were thinking about, and then they write down in one box on a piece of paper stuff from the past they thought about, in one box stuff from the future they thought about, and in one box stuff that was about now that they thought about, right? Kind of a sorting activity for thought. Tier 3 here builds upon tier 2 with a little bit more discussion, and then an opportunity to practice again another 3 minutes of mindfulness. Right now here, I will say 3 minutes is arbitrary. Your client can only sit for 1 minute, great, 1 minute. 30 seconds, great, 30 seconds. 15 minutes, super duper, 15 minutes, right? Those are the sorts of things that you're gonna have to monitor with your own clients. So here would be an example of what the worksheet for that would look like. Kind of a key thing about AIM is that it's really up to you to bring it to life, right? If I show you this is not even a script, it's a framework. It's an outline of what you're going to do with your client. It's setting you up to effectively engage in the psychological flexibility with them. It's kind of up to you to bring it to life, right? My background's in teaching, so this is kind of like my bread and butter. Not everyone in the behavioral world is always so comfortable with this sort of thing. So it's really up to you how creative you want to get with how you engage your clients in these activities. Creating things, making it art-based, making it physical, letting them create things, manipulate things, having things you can hang in their environment that they can see to serve as cues for engaging in certain kinds of flexibility, that sort of thing. So again, those other 3 components, the point system, progress monitoring, functional reinforcement, are all there to support that development of psychological flexibility, okay? In a point system, you're going to want to provide reinforcers for engaging in appropriate behavior and demonstrating psychological flexibility, practicing, using a diffusion technique, stating what they value, being able to identify what's going on in the present moment. Okay, so thinking about individualizing and utilizing the curriculum, things to keep in mind are the populations you work with. Some of you might work with children, some of you might work with adults, you might work with individuals who have more typically developing language skills, but struggle more behaviorally. You might have clients who have the inverse needs, right? Our client populations tend to be very diverse. So how do we meet needs of different populations? The other thing that's going to differ is the setting that you're in. Are you working one-on-one with someone? Are you overseeing a team working one-on-one with someone? Are you working in a group setting? Are you working in a residential facility? Are you working in people's homes, right? The setting that you're implementing AIM is going to really kind of change the way that it looks. And of course, you probably have already thought of many other things that you want to talk about. So we can, if anyone who can hang with me, I can stay a little late if that's still okay. Let's talk about some of your questions. So I don't see any questions. I'm not quite sure how that works. Should I just ask people to share them in the chat?
So if you guys have questions, go ahead, put it in the chat, and we can discuss a little bit about AIM and some more of the information from Dr. Palla. So we have her here. So feel free to put your chats in there, thinking about like how can you apply if you were using this in your setting, what would that look like? You can, just kind of jog her brain, mess around while we have her here to, talk to her about all her knowledge that she has in this.
I'm open to all questions, including those about my dogs. I'm open to that too. And just if anyone's typing or thinking, has anyone here messed around using AIM a little bit? Not yet? Okay. How do you know if someone is now more flexible? Great question. So from our approach, what we really emphasize is just using their attainment of behavioral goals as the primary indicator, right? If supporting their psychological flexibility is making an impact, we'll see that in the way they behave in their environment. So largely, we don't highlight other sources of data. However, you can also define certain psychological flexibility behaviors that you want to track. So if you're teaching certain diffusion techniques or how to engage in mindful breathing or to articulate what your values are, you could look for overt indicators that they're doing those things, right? You're going to, through the course of the curriculum, teach them different ways of getting some space from their thoughts, being accepting in the moment. And if you see them using those techniques, those would be indicators. There are also self-report measures developed for children or for adults that measure psychological flexibility using self-report. So there's a few different ways that you can get that info. So if they're being mindful, they've gotten better at it, and then what comes next? They're more focused on the preferred outcome. Yeah, they're able to respond in the environment to whatever they need to in that moment, right? That's really what being mindful is about, is being effective in your current situation. So rather than worrying about something that happened before, being anxious about what might happen next, you're responding to the stuff happening here and now. That's really the ultimate goal of mindfulness. The youngest age of a child I've worked, well, me personally, I've worked on using AIM with kindergarteners and older. Going any younger than that, people have done. You just are simplifying even more, focusing more so on things like, mindful breathing, just identifying something they're thinking about, saying what they care about, just simplified tasks. But I would say, like, comfort zone wise, developmentally, like once you start getting second, third grader level, that's when it starts to get kind of easy to implement. Are any recommended resource links to materials for activities? Well, use the AIM curriculum. Other than that, we do have a Facebook group that kind of does share ideas of what that they've done to kind of bring these activities to life. So that would be my suggestion. Does the AIM curriculum include plans for maintenance generalization, plans moving forward, independent use of these skills? Not specifically. We just give that framework for how you would support that using a functional reinforcement approach. But then it's up to you as the clinician to plan for the maintenance and generalization. I can't really emphasize enough how much AIM is not a scripted, structured intervention. It is a framework that you use to develop an intervention yourself, which is great because it allows it to be flexible and truly individualized for your clients. But it can feel a little stressful when you're new to it to feel like, am I doing it right? But you have, if you are, a professional in this area, you have the tools you need in order to do that. What time and resources look like for implementing this in an agency? I won't even attempt to answer that because there are so many variables that affect that. But definitely upfront training is a huge thing, and ongoing support is a huge thing. That's kind of all I'll say. Okay. I think the last question was not for me, it was for Ree. If you want to answer, you can feel free. Okay.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Dr. Rogers put in the chat that we are going to be developing the AIM curriculum as one of our prepackaged Tier 2 interventions. So what that might look like is lesson plans and guides for staff and for families to access, and then our team providing some training and coaching and follow-up that goes along with that. So that's something cool to look forward to in the future.
Awesome. All right, well, with that, I will say thank you all so much for your time. Our third code word, did I miss our second code word? I'm so sorry if I skipped that. Hang on, let me make sure. Okay, our second code word was heavy. I apologize. So we had first code word sudden, second code word heavy, and our third code word is supermarket. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Palla, for coming and talking with us today. Your presentation was a real treat. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and bringing, this very interesting approach to behavioral intervention to our audience today. So thank you a million times over. You're welcome to stay. I think we're going to go ahead and move into some recognition for a lot of our agencies and individuals